Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another Hash It Out episode. I'm super excited about this one in particular because I love when we get to talk about topics that touch such a wide range of businesses, and it gets more real world to me. And today is really about HIPAA compliance, and I'm very excited and lucky to be able to chat with Dan Wagner today of 66 Degrees. Dan, I'm going to let him talk about himself, but just a quick overview. 66 Degrees has like a proven track record of providing innovative technologies in the cloud, predominantly for healthcare organization. And Dan is at the tip of that spear with a focus on Google Workspace and productivity. Dan, tell me a little bit about yourself and 66 Degrees.
Awesome. It's an honor to be here. First of all, you're saying it's an honor to have me, but it's really, I love doing these types of things, and I really enjoy speaking with you and, of course, the Virtru itself. But hi, everybody. My name is Dan Wagner. I'm a senior customer engineer focused on Google Workspace and productivity at 66 Degrees. I've been with the organization for over 7 years now, seen a lot during that time. We started off as a Google Workspace, I guess you could say, provider and reseller, and started moving into professional services, helping organizations like healthcare organizations move from platforms like Microsoft into Google. My current role as a senior customer engineer, I've been doing for about 4 years now. So I help a lot of organizations who want to discover or continue to grow their footprint in the cloud, help them design solutions, as well as enable them to grow and scale with the products that they're using today. So before that, though, I was actually at the Second City in Chicago. That's where I cut my teeth in the IT industry, helped them move from Microsoft to Google back in 2009. I've never really looked back from the Google ecosystem, but Google's really good at like working together with a lot of other different platforms. Virtru knows that too, so that's great. And it's been a wild ride, and it's particularly around the healthcare stuff. I'll get to that in a second, but just to tell you about 66 Degrees a bit more too. We've grown into more of a GCP. We're one of the only pure play Google partners out there. So that doesn't necessarily mean we don't work with other platforms, but we're very specialized in what we do with Google, partner with them very closely, as well as great ISVs like Virtru as well. So that's a little bit of history about me and 66 Degrees. So, but again, great to be here today.
Yeah, and Dan, I don't you, and you went through a lot there, and I appreciate that. But
sorry.
One thing I want to kind of no, it's perfect. But one thing I wanted to make sure to highlight is that you actually come from the buyer side, right? You were actually on the healthcare side in the beginning.
I was years ago. Multiple lives ago, I was an optician for 3 years at an eye care place up in Gurnee, Illinois. That was right around the time when HIPAA was really starting to be, I guess, required, and you had to be compliant if you were in the healthcare industry. So we, learned a lot through that process. I learned just from being on the outside through insurance, having to go through insurance, having documents that were, you couldn't really have a file anymore laying out on your desk. You couldn't have your files showing last names, that type of a thing. And that was really not only it kind of it overturned kind of what you had to do as a business, but at the end of the day, you were looking at like, no, this is really good. This is protecting people's information, and it made sense, but it was also a bit of a tornado, if you will, of
challenge
and making things different. Like, we now have to do a little bit more with encryption on email, et cetera, which was, one of the foundations of HIPAA and sharing information, of course.
I love that. I mean, I think that the reason why I wanted to highlight that, because I think it's really important to have the empathy for the healthcare industry in particular, because for me personally, why I love healthcare so much is the mission is so important. And everything they do is around making sure that patient outcome is a positive one. They really are invested in that. And every stakeholder in this industry I've ever encountered, they all have a really strong mission alignment. I love industries like that. I know you do too, probably. Yeah. But your empathy for that, I think, is really critical. So when I ask you, and we talk about HIPAA compliance today, which is woven into everything that's going on, and today, there is so much more awareness today around data awareness, data visibility, data protection. These concepts, they just were not in the awareness sphere before, but today it is.
Yeah.
And with your empathy and with your background and your years of helping them, I would love to get your feedback on kind of what challenges are these practices today facing with securing that sensitive patient information. What are those challenges as they're faced with that HIPAA regulation requirement and trying to move to some of these cloud native experiences? What are those primary challenges that you see?
I don't think we're saying HIPAA, and I don't think it just applies to HIPAA. I think it's like HIPAA started this, like for the better. I think like it's more or less of understanding, first of all, your identities and who's using what and who's working, your lines of business, and what do they need to be successful while being secure and compliant and protecting the organization and the people that you're helping, right? Be it a patient or be it someone that's buying shoes. It's still relevant, I think, in personal identifiable information, or PII as we call it. So I mean, anything from a patient perspective and understanding the transition for being compliant, we're obviously in a remote world, right? There's a lot more remote help being done. There's a lot more remote communication being done. A lot of that stems, as far as what we're seeing today. It's like, how can we be secure, flexible, and agile, all the buzzwords we want to use there, but still at the same time, making sure that there's no impact, there's no disruption. If anything, you want to make it easier on people. Like, do you feel like,
I think that makes a lot of sense. Do you feel like, and I think a lot of these buzzwords get complicated for a lot of the buyers. They see a lot of these things, but the truth is, in many ways, it's never changed too much. It's like, hey, here is this cadre of technology. How does it make my business better? My business is improving the outcomes for patients. And today we're living in a predominantly remote and decentralized world, which complicates it, right? So you're the kind of the practitioner helping translate this language. And I'm curious though, in healthcare today, are you seeing a lot of the reputational awareness, like, which is, hey, you said HIPAA started it, and that's true. I think there's got to be this catalyst. But I've always found, and you tell me what you think about this, in healthcare in particular, they really care about those patients. And because there's an awareness around data protection, are they starting to see, do you feel awareness around, this reputation of protecting this PI and making it aware that we're doing the right things is important. It's important to how we're doing business. Do you find that has changed, especially since you've been with this for so long?
I do. I think a lot of people like that are out there that are needing help. They want to make sure that all of this is new to them. A lot of it is new. So you think about like the older generation, that they're wanting to get the help, but they're still very protective of who they are, as very well everybody should be. We want to make sure that the data that's being provided is being used appropriately. And I think organizations could lean into that and say, like, listen, we do care about that. It's not just a form you fill out. How many times you go to a new doctor and you have the HIPAA sheet, right? You have to say, like, I understand that you have my data and you're going to be responsible with that data. So it's like that mutual agreement. But from that piece of paper, where does that leave the patient, right? Sure, they put the ink on the paper, but exemplifying that as an organization, I think that's what you're saying too, to
transparency. Exactly.
Transparent. Right. In a sense of like, where we care about that. Not only we do care about your health, but we care about who you are from an identity perspective, And
I'm curious, what are some of those strategies? What are the strategies that you kind of help these organizations implement so that when they say, you are trusting me with this information, I am doing what's best. Here's what I'm doing to protect that data. How does encryption play a role in that? And as that changed now that everyone's trying to be more cloud native, like what is your feedback there? What are those strategies that you're kind of helping them implement?
It's about understanding them, first of all, right? We need to understand what business you're doing, what your lines of business are doing, what are specifics about that organization. Like if it's nurses versus opticians versus whatever, like we need to understand their role to be successful in helping people in your business, as well as, what's the security aspect? How are they working with customers? Is it strictly through telepresence? Is it strictly through video? Is it strictly through chat? Is it strictly through email? So once we help identify those, I guess you could say, workflows and use cases, that's when we're like, hey, you're using email, you're using XYZ mail platform. Here is, for example, Virtru. Again, a quick little plug. It works really well with Google Workspace. I love the way it lays on top of everything. I'm not being paid for this, everybody, just so you know. It is.
Well, I do appreciate that, though. We've tried to work very hard on that interoperability, but I do appreciate that, Dan.
But in that case of email, right? So there are some practices that might, like the baked-in encryption from Google, Microsoft, etc., will appease them. But if there's specifics from requirements, then we're like, okay, we understand this tool was going to fit your need. Let's put it in place. We'll let you use it. Let's see how that works, and make sure it doesn't impact, or we want it to be non-destructive. If, like I said, if anything, we want to be more productive at the end of the day. Because, old school platforms, you had to have a separate server somewhere. There was a portal you had to log into, and you had to remember the password for that and all that stuff too. So as the products have grown over time, that's what we're looking for to meet, honestly, just meet the customer where they're at, and see what we can do to help not only solve for that, but also help them grow and not be an impactful thing as they grow as a business too.
Yeah, a quick comment on that. I love your approach because we have this saying in Virtru, it's respect the data. But the truth is, data is just a proxy for a human. We're respecting the human. And by understanding what they're doing, what their business is, how they're carrying that out, the connection, the relationship between that practitioner and the patient, you really have a much deeper understanding of the sensitivity of that data, where it came from, where it's going. And then ultimately you can define some kind of risk scenario. Well, here are the areas where it's risky. And one really risky area, and I don't know I'd love your thoughts on this. It's it's why I'm asking, but I think historically you have a lot of box checking going on with HIPAA and things where it's like, okay, we're checking the box, I feel good about it. But the reality is, like you said, sometimes these baked in solutions don't meet all the need because data has to move, data has to be shared.
Right.
I got to share it externally. I got to receive it from someone external. These boundaries where some of those built-in ecosystem solutions don't fit the bill. Tell me a little bit about data sharing, like how you're, what you're hearing, what you're seeing. How are they sharing the data? We like to think that we're really sophisticated today, but email is still like one of the primary ways in which we share information, right? Tell me a little bit more about the complexities of this data exchange and how you're addressing those.
Yep. And I love this conversation too. I was talking about the people side, like understanding how they all work in lines of business, but like it is driven by data and how they work. And you need to understand without getting too into the deal, you'd be surprised at how many organizations are like, well, we don't know how our data is structured. We don't know how this is. We don't have these controls in place to do these types of, driven by compliance, right? And that's really where you start to untangle the rope and try to figure out that from a complexity standpoint. What I try to approach that as is like, there's no way if a company has like 10 terabytes of data of file storage and they're wanting to say like, I need to do X, Y, Z. And I try to walk that back a bit is like, okay, first of all, why? Right? Why are we looking at that? Second of all, can we look at a data set or a line of business again to see if we can help classify, right, data in a way that's going to be useful to the company and the end users? Then I take it back even further in the sense of like identity management. Because when you're working with cloud-based platforms, right, you're having an identity, a user, right, that you're, as an organization, supplying them access to your organizational data. So to me, it starts there. Make sure correct security controls are in place there too. Two-step verification is a must these days, right? I know that's some change, like that's a change for some organizations. You'd be surprised. And there's some organizations that still don't have that. And that's like, well, we kind of try and start, we also, if we're wanting to begin there, right, we do a security posture review, right? Let's see how you are across your whole organization. Is it, how's identity set up? How's your admin policy set up? How's your drive sharing set up? How, application management set up? OAuth, like those types of things. That's what we start to like, again, untangling that rope, so to speak, to try and identify how you can start to classify data, go by role-based and group-based permissions, right? So if we're looking at having to segment that out, depending on, really doesn't matter what platform you're on, the tenets of principle of least privilege are still there, right? So once you identify like access requirements and then go into, let's see how we can classify data. I know with Google Workspace, and Virtru as well has a DLP element as well, where you can, help flag things. Like say, if you're going to send an email that has XYZ information in it, you're either going to get a warning or say like, you can't do that with an external party. So that's kind of, that's pretty much, I hate to again use like the high level overview of like how we would kind of approach these complex situations. You need to see where they're at again, from a technical standpoint, identity management, group management, how their organization is set up, what tools they're using, if they're using a multiple, they might have Box, Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, like what are we doing over here? Why are we using so many different tools? Can we consolidate? Because there are definitely valid reasons to have multiple products, but let's see what we can do to help minimize either those, I like to call them points of failure, or points of success, depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, what I love about that though is, you're meeting them where they are. In many ways, I think this journey for data protection, security posture is very similar to the industry area. And you don't go in as a patient with an issue and immediately be better. There's a journey, right? There's a path to it. You have to start somewhere. You said something though. You said you'd be surprised. And I think we do this a lot in the tech industry, right? Is we like to say, well, obviously you should be doing these 5 things. And I think sometimes, and I'm speaking for myself, I just want to be really clear, I don't think you're doing this. Sometimes I think we come off the wrong way, which is like,
agree.
There are these baselines that you should be doing, but it does not mean everybody is ready or prepared or can be there. And it's that lack of sensitivity, I think, sometimes in this industry that makes it even more difficult for organizations to adopt these things, in my opinion. So I love the fact that you're starting with and meeting them where they are, because that's the only viable path to a better security posture, in my opinion. So I think that that's a great approach.
I agree with that opinion, and I stand by that too. And you have to remind yourself, I mean, I've been doing this for some time, and I try to do a reset, almost every day. I think to myself, I look at my schedule, I look at my calendar, I'm like, who am I speaking with today? Like how am I going to approach this conversation? I try to, there's an old adage of saying like, you want to be the smartest person in the room. I don't believe that for my role. Like the smartest person in the room is the customer, because they're going to tell me what is going to make them successful. I'm only going to help them kind of find their way to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like I don't want to be Eeyore and be like, do you have 2-step verification set up? Do you have DLP set up? It's
I can't believe you don't have that, which is such I've seen some of these industries. Yeah.
Dare you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's right. I remember I was in the acute care space for a good while, and I remember being in the ER with those physicians that were doing amazing things every day. And, I'm coming in there trying to impose certain practices while they're trying to save lives. And I think to myself, I'm so thankful for that experience, because technology in every aspect is meant to support and facilitate this process. And on the cyber side, when we talk about encryption, encryption has a very negative past. It has a past where it's very difficult to use. It gets in the way of everything you're doing. No one can open it, right? And we've really, and I'm speaking for Virtru now, like in our mission in particular, we've tried to overcome that and be sensitive to the practice and say, totally get it. But that control and visibility you get with encryption can be had in a way that's easy to use. I see more of this today, right? I see a shift in this aspect today where that focus on the user, the focus on usability is better across the industry. I see more of that, which I think is great. and hopefully it results in more. Now, and I want this is comment on any of this, but this one particular part where we used to say, block, you cannot do this, you cannot share that data, right? Whereas now, because some things like the data-centric encryption are more accessible and easier to use, you can actually allow that to happen. You can let it go, and you can let it share, and you can let the business work. But what do you think about that? I'm curious if you agree, and you don't have to. I just love your feedback on that.
No, I do agree with you again. I hate to agree with you all the time because sometimes disagreements are fun in these conversations, but but no, I do agree. When you were going to say, you said something like it's going to say block or something like that. And
yes,
I thought you were going to say, there was again an old phrase of function over form, right? There's that, like, you want to make it work before you make it look good or work good, right? So I've always like kind of, back in my days of web design and that stuff, I'd want them to make it look good first before I'd actually make it work. And that's terrible. Yeah. It's an absolutely terrible way of doing it. But I think like nowadays, in the sense of like they can run parallel in production, right? In development, I should say.
Yeah.
So it's the end user experience is highly considered, so important, because if they don't know how to use it and they don't know how to use it well, they're not going to use it well.
Oh, amen. I mean, how many times have you seen that? How many times have you seen an imposed policy? This is what you should do with no accessibility, and what do people do? They just don't do it, or they find a way around it. I feel like we've got this broken record in cyber, and it's like the last 20 years that's the song playing, which is I think we're overcoming that though. Clearly your empathy first approach to process, person, and data alignment has helped you address that. So I so appreciate your feedback. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I'm just curious, in the little bit of time we have left, where do you think this is going? Tell me a little bit about you spend a lot of time in healthcare, a lot of time in security and compliance. You've seen a lot of the emerging technologies, like data-centric security and encryption, allowing things to be shared. You even see some of these big providers railing against interoperability in healthcare, which is crazy to me. I think that they're not going to win long term. But I would love to get your feedback on where do you think these trends are going for healthcare, data security, and compliance. Give me your 2 or 3 bullet points there.
I think a lot of it's going to be still focused on re-architecting some internal stuff. A lot of these healthcare organizations are still on legacy platforms or legacy systems. Yes. So they're having to, I've managed an Active Directory many times in my past, like, or where are they at? Like there's a lot of fear, like unraveling that. So I think, but they're going to have to make a choice one way or the other, or they're going to have to invest in another on-prem and manage that internally. But I think it's been proven that the cloud is actually more secure, and there's more benefits to going to the cloud rather than having to manage your own infrastructure in your own data center, colo, whatever you're going to be doing that in. So I think there's still going to be discovery. There's going to have to be, I hate to use a word, but empathy and understanding where they're at and seeing like how we can help them move to the cloud in a confident and positive way, right? The second point is looking at different types of communication. Yes, I'm going to drop the AI conversation into here too. I think everybody's very excited to see what they can do with conversational and generative AI. So while that first bullet I mentioned, they're going to have to play catch up. Like if they're wanting to be competitive too, as far as a healthcare provider, they're probably going to have to look at that too. What is the safest and most secure way that I can leverage these new tools that has been bestowed upon the earth in the last, 10 months or so?
It feels like this AI is visiting us from another planet. It's so new to everybody, but that's it. Exactly right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's a whole other podcast, right? But I mean, it's been very reactive.
That's right. Yeah.
And I mean, there's even organizations that they're not locking down their applications. So I think that's the other thing too, is like identity. Yeah. I've said that by this for years. Is like really look at your identity, look at your application management, SaaS management, etc. So and I think AI is also considered a kind of a SaaS product because they're starting to have these startups that are using specific tools or use cases and workflows, and they're doing really good, really fast. But how is that safe for the organization, right? I do personally, I'm a little biased, but I think Google is really taking a very responsible approach for that in their pay product, in Workspace and Duet and all that. So just think about that as we move along. It's going to be like this the next couple of, it's going to be this. It's going to be nuts. But
I think that's right. And the pace is just picking up. And Dan, I got to say, with that reality facing the healthcare industry and the healthcare industry being at varying degrees of adoption, which I would say predominantly is early in the adoption phase, I am personally thankful and glad that you and your organization is there to help them along the way, because they need that help. And it's not because they're not capable. They're focused on a different domain and they need our help on the technical side to make those outcomes better. I really enjoyed our conversation today, Dan. I appreciate you taking the time.
Likewise, Rob. I honestly wasn't sure what to expect, but I hope we can do this again soon, or a meet in real life at some point. This has been really great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Dan, you have a good day.
You too. Take care.